Okay, the last thing I want to be known as is the GDPR guy. So please don't ever call me that. And, and I don't know why, but they always give me like the last session of the day. And GDPR is probably about the last thing you want to hear about before dinner, unless you're Jonas, who gets really excited about GDPR. But thank you for trying to hype up the audience for what is otherwise a pretty, maybe not boring, but very legal topic. I originally gave this presentation at the North American Symposium, and I had a turnout of about 15 people. So I can tell that with the number of people here, obviously it's a lot more relevant for you guys here in the EU. And over in the North American Symposium, I spent a good amount of time just talking about the basics of GDPR. And I'm going to assume that for the audience here that I'm not going to have to go over as much what is GDPR, why do we have it, what are some of the principles that it covers. I'm going to spend maybe just about 5 minutes just giving a brief overview of kind of where we are. But I know this is DevCon, so I'll try to spend more of it talking about some of the new stuff that we introduced in 7.1 to address your journey towards GDPR compliance and take a quick look at some of the things we have coming down the road. So it is, what is it, November 7th now, and we are, 5 months past May 25th. And I'm kind of curious, for the various organizations that we have represented here, how many of you guys would say that you are comfortable with where you are as far as GDPR compliance in your organization? All right, okay, we are about half, and the other half, you might be kind of playing a more wait-and-see approach. And I would say actually this audience here is much better than the hands I got raised during North American Symposium, which was about 2 hands. And the fact that still, even though we are 5 months out from GDPR's May 25th, doomsday date, the fact that there's still about half of us in this room who are still not fully comfortable with saying we are GDPR compliant shows me that, there was a lot of FUD, a lot of hype, a lot of, GDPR is going to bankrupt your company, GDPR is going to be, the end of marketing as we know it. And this is all that we saw in all the tech blogs and tech news headlines before May 25th. We know some organizations here invested, I'm sure, hundreds of thousands, millions, maybe even tens of millions of dollars doing all the due diligence, all the operational, all the technical measures necessary to get yourself ready for GDPR. I know for certain American websites, they made it a lot easier. They just said, if IP address is anywhere from the EU, we'll just block you guys and be done with it, because how many of you guys really care about news from the LA Times anyways, right? Well, we're way past May 25th, and if you look at the very end there, it looks like the amount of attention, the amount of hype, or the amount of FUD around GDPR has pretty much gone back to where we were a full year ago. And it might kind of seem like, not much seems to have really happened. No company seems to have gone bankrupt. We're not seeing lawsuits left and right, although there are a few out there right now. And it seems like it was, in many ways, maybe much ado about nothing. But the reality is that GDPR is really just the beginning. I titled this talk something like Building Solutions on Liferay DXP in a Post-GDPR World. And what I meant by post-GDPR world is that data protection laws are really the new normal. And GDPR being perhaps the most significant legislation as far as data protection comes, is what triggered this tidal wave of data protection laws that affect not only EU, but will eventually span out to, I really believe, the rest of the world. So this map here is a Forrester's analysis of privacy and data protection by country. And there's a couple interesting things that I noticed here. One, it's the countries that you see in blue and green that have the most data protection or data privacy laws. And it's the countries that are in orange and red that have the least. And when I thought about it, I was thinking, I would have thought it'd be the other way around, right? You want to have red, orange, beware. If you're in one of these countries, you really have to worry a lot about data protection laws. And if you're in the green and blue, you're kind of off the hook. You're let off easy. But I think the reason why Forrester chose to make green and blue the most restrictive and orange and red the least restrictive is to show that really data protection laws are a valuable, good thing. Maybe not so much if you are the IT compliance manager and you're worried about implementing all the policies, but as an end consumer, I think all of us can agree that, hey, we want to know what all these big corporations are doing with our data. And secondly, I really do believe that in just a matter of years that this entire map will be green and blue. Already in Brazil, there's the LGPD, which will go into effect February 2020, their equivalents of the GDPR. Bahrain has theirs in August 2019. India is about to pass theirs. In the US, California has passed their own Consumer Privacy Act. There's lots of federal bills that are being introduced by various senators in the US. And so it's only a matter of time before we see maybe not the exact letter of the law of GDPR being instilled in the rest of the world, but definitely the spirit of what GDPR is trying to accomplish. And so there's no turning back, right? GDPR or some variation of it will apply, obviously for pretty much everybody in this room because we are in the EU, but even if you weren't in the EU, data protection will eventually apply. And I always liken GDPR or data protection laws a lot like security. In the wild west of the internet some 20 years ago, we weren't exactly sure what internet security meant. Do you really have to encrypt everything over HTTPS or just a login page? Do you need to worry about cross-site scripting? Do you need to worry about potential SQL injections? Do you really need to sanitize all the data that comes in? And all of the, do you need to salt passwords and just how many bits of encryption do you need to really be secure? And these are questions that by now we've pretty much developed, understood, almost globally accepted standards for what is considered a secure website. And of course, there's all sorts of new, inventive, creative ways of hacking, and security will continuously tighten. But there are certain websites where you could literally plug into third-party security evaluation sites, and they'll tell you, on a scale of 1 to 100, how secure is this website? And so it's become pretty standardized nowadays. I would say in terms of data protection law, we're relatively in the Wild West still. It's still early on. We're still trying to figure out exactly what does it mean to really be transparent about how you use a user's personal data. There's still a lot of questions, and even the GDPR has a lot of gray area matters, which I'm sure if you guys have tried to implement, there's all these questions. And I heard a really interesting example during the unconference where one of the attendees brought up this example where if you have a group of 20 employees and you know that collectively they took 10 sick days, is that personal data? Well, you can say no because you don't know which of these 20 ended up taking those 10 sick days. But what if you knew that those same 20 employees had taken 0 sick days collectively? Then all of a sudden, that does become personal data because each of these 20 employees never took a sick day. Right? So even those sorts of really edge case scenarios, right? Those questions of when I am required to delete a user's personal data and I have 20 years of off-site tape backups of my data stored somewhere, do I need to really go back, reload all those tape backups, delete the user's data, then resave all those tapes and put them back off-site? Right? And these are the sorts of questions where the answer is really, it depends. There's a lot of gray areas when it comes to the GDPR, but the principle does apply. The principle is well understood that, hey, the goal is to treat your users' data with fairness, with transparency, with honesty. And so in this new world that we live in, right, for us at Liferay, one of the things we're trying to figure out is what do we need to do as a provider of a platform to help you in your GDPR journey. And I use those words very carefully. I chose those words very carefully because still to this day, right, I get the question, is Liferay DXP GDPR compliant? And they want the yes or no answer. Usually it comes from our salespeople, and they have an RFP, and they have an opportunity, and it's usually a line item. Do you support these connectors? Do you support these authentication methods? Are you GDPR compliant? Yes or no? And I'm always reluctant to say yes or no because, as a platform, there is no simple answer of, hey, if you use our software, whatever you build on it will be GDPR compliant or it won't be GDPR compliant, because it really depends on you as you're building the solutions to make sure that you have a privacy policy, right, that is very clear and up to date, and it's true to how you actually use your user's personal data. It's up to you to have the right organizational measures. But one thing we do say is, hey, Liferay is a platform flexible and powerful enough to support and aid you in your journey towards GDPR compliance. And in that journey, in trying to figure out, well, as being a platform, being customizable, being very extensible and flexible for you guys to do almost whatever you need to accomplish on this platform, what are some of the things that we can do to make this journey less painful for you? And so what we did was we poured over the text of the GDPR, all couple hundred pages. And there's a lot to it, right? There's all sorts of things about doing data, about appointing data protection officers and signing data processing agreements and doing all these risk assessments. But we wanted to really look at, on the technical side, what would be difficult for you as Liferay integrators and customers to accomplish as far as these GDPR technical requirements. And a couple that the two that we saw as opportunities to really tackle was, one, the right to data portability and the right to data erasure or the right to be forgotten. And so we came up in Liferay 7.1 and now backported and available to DXP 7.0 as of Service Pack 8 or Fix Pack 60. We provide these two new options to delete personal data and export personal data. And just a few points to mention before we take a quick look at a demo. So not only is this a UI for administrators to be able to go in and perform these actions, but we provided an API because we know that you have your own custom applications, and you know how you store and what sort of data that you store, and you know best what it means to anonymize or to what extent you should or shouldn't delete the data that you hold about a user. So we created this framework that's customizable, and it integrates with Service Builder, as Jorge mentioned this morning, so that if you're using Service Builder, then a lot of the back-end code is pre-wired and built for you. But even if you're not using Service Builder, you can still implement these APIs to handle these requests. And we did provide base implementations for most of the personal data storing apps of Liferay DXP out of the box, including blogs, message boards, document library, and a few others. So let's go ahead and take a look at a quick demo. Okay, so we have here, so what I have here is a sanitized clone of our community.liferay.com site. And if any of you guys have been on the community website, you know our most active and most frequent member is an individual by the name of Mr. Nebinger. And let's say, God forbid, that one day he said, hey, I want to move all of my data to some other provider like SharePoint, and I want to invoke my right to data portability and export all my messages, all my blogs, so I could go put it on their site. So over here in the users menu, we have a new function called export personal data. And we can start a new process. And these are some of the apps that we provide out-of-the-box implementations for. And you'll notice that he has about 100 blogs, a couple hundred documents, and 14,000 messages. So go ahead and select these, click export. This uses a similar framework and UI to our staging export. And you'll notice here that in a matter of not too much time, we start exporting, right, all of the assets that we've identified are associated or belong to Mr. Nebinger. And it'll take about a minute for those 14,000 messages to export. But let's go ahead and take a look at the documents. So I'll go ahead and open this up. It's really difficult to do this. Let's see if I can zoom in a bit here. All right. And over in the downloads, these are the documents that we just exported and downloaded. And you'll see inside here we have a machine-readable format of all the files that were associated to Mr. Nebinger, as well as the binary for the images themselves. Okay. And in a little bit, we'll take a look at exactly how this is working underneath the hood. All right, now let's take a look at the data erasure example. So I'm trying to apologize for, it's kind of difficult to do this on this tiny screen. Okay, so what I have here is a custom application you'll see up there. It's called Liferay EV chargers. And long story short, in the Diamond Bar office in our headquarters, we have this whole rotation system for those who have electric vehicles and the 4 free chargers that we have. We have a limit of 2 hours of charging, and you're supposed to check in and out. So I decided to create a simple application that would demo kind of a site where you can go in and actually check in and check out to see who's gone well over their allotted 2-hour limit. So here I'm logged in as myself, and I can go in here and I can click, start charge. Okay, and if I, as the admin, I can look at the history of everybody who has charged and how long they've charged. I can see a list of all the vehicles that everybody needs to register. So I have a fair amount of personal data about users' charging history, their actual vehicles. Also down here, we have some blog posts that people are sharing tips and some news about electric vehicles. So let's say that I, Dennis Ju, invoke my request to be forgotten. So as the admin, I can go into the control panel, go into the same menu, and it could invoke. Did I choose the right person? Oh, yes, okay. Click delete personal data. And I'll be taken to this 5-step wizard. The first step, which is to deactivate the user so that they can no longer log in and create more data. The second step, the data that we have on the personal site, so the files or blogs, those we are going to delete since we know that everything there directly belongs to the user. And then the third step, here we have a review step where we can go in and take a look at all of the data that has been identified as belonging to the user that we can't immediately delete or anonymize because this data or information might be a shared information, might be useful. For example, on a message board, we wouldn't want to just delete all of Mr. Nebinger's data and information, ideally, we'd want to somehow try to figure out a way to scrub and anonymize so that the important information is still available to the community. So if I go over here to EV chargers, I have an option to view, anonymize, or delete. So if I take a look at view, I see that this is the one vehicle that's been registered to Dennis Ju. And I can choose to either delete or anonymize this data. For now, I'm going to anonymize, and I'll show you in a little bit later what this actually did. Okay. And I also see that I have one blog that's associated to me. So if I take a look at the blogs, I have a couple blogs. So I see here that I have a couple of blogs, and this one, if I take a look. So I had created this blog that says Dennis's top tips to maximize your EV's range. So as the admin, I might want to keep this article, but I want to get rid of this personal information that includes my email address, where I actually live. Just go ahead and delete that. Save the blog. Okay. And then it looks like I have a duplicate. So the one that I just edited, which I think was the bottom one, I'm going to anonymize this one. And the second one, since it's a duplicate or doesn't matter, I'm going to go ahead and delete. All right, so we've taken care of those two blogs. Now when we go back, we see that we've taken care of all of the data that is associated to Dennis. Go ahead and complete the step. So we're done reviewing the data that the administrator needs to take some action on. Step 4 is kind of a auto magical step where it will take care of all of the system data, or what you have coded as we can auto anonymize or auto delete without the admin needing to review it. And then in step 5, we are going to go ahead and delete the user from the system. All right, so now let's take a look at what we have on the site. So we'll see that over here, Dennis Ju was charging, but now it's anonymous. We'll see that the license plate has just been filled with a bunch of A's. And we'll see that this blog that used to say Dennis's top tips to maximize your EV's range is now been associated to a new user, anonymous, and that information that was there that was considered personal has been removed. All right. So what is actually happening underneath the hood? So let's take a quick peek. So I did want to say, it's so easy, a product manager can do it, says me, a product manager. Right, so the code behind this, if we take a look. So first, you'll see that we have a few new attributes here called UAD anonymize, UAD non-anonymizable, and a path. So over here on the left-hand side, you'll see that we have a new module called EV Charger UAD. And most of this is all the base classes, and some of the extending classes have been auto-generated because of what we put in the service XML in EV Charger service. Okay. And you can look at the DTD, which will give you some explanations as to what these fields actually do. But this is how Service Builder will kind of give you a shortcut to implementing a lot of these new methods. So that's the DTD. So, no, sorry, I need to take a really close look. Okay, all right. So here we have the export method. actually, okay, let's start with the anonymizer. So you'll see here that this class extends the base vehicle anonymizer. And you'll see here in this line of code, right, we have a set license plate that will basically be your logic for determining how do we anonymize this data. And for those of you guys who are familiar with GDPR, you might know that the bar for true anonymization is quite high. You know, it's not easy to do because you need to make sure that it's beyond reasonably doable to reassociate this data back to that user. So you can choose the logic or configure your own logic, or you can choose to just automatically delete the license plate or any field that you want. Here we have the export method. And you'll notice that there's a 2XML string, and this is all auto-generated. But you can also override these classes. You could also choose to override the method that tries to, or that gets, figures out what data is associated to this user. So you'll notice in the method signature that it takes a user ID. And so what the framework does is when it says, hey, I want to delete the data for Dennis Ju, you might be able to find it by just seeing who is the created, who's the creator or who's the last modifier. But if you have other identifiers, maybe you're storing them by email address or screen name, or maybe you have some third-party ID that you want to look up, you can write the custom code here to figure out what is all of the data that might be associated to Dennis Ju or belongs to Dennis Ju. So right now, the admin guide for how to use this framework is already available. The developer guide is coming soon. I was hoping to have it by DevCon. But we will have full developer documentation for how to leverage this framework. And the idea of this is for your administrators to be able to go in after you as the developers or IT folk have figured out how do you want to actually delete, export, or anonymize the user's data upon request. Stuff that we have coming in 7.2, you'll notice right now we're just collecting the data for that user across the entire instance. We're going to add the ability to filter by site and application, to sort, to search. We're also going to support hierarchical data so that if you have, let's say, a message board category or a DL folder, underneath that you can see all of the file entries, and underneath the file entries you can see all of the file versions. So right now each of those are treated as distinct entities, but we will support hierarchical data. And we're also going to update the dashboard so that instead of doing kind of the 5-step wizard, you're able to kind of jump in and out and perform actions as needed. So these features we built because we felt these would be the most painful for you guys as developers to figure out how to do programmatically, especially upon request, especially if you're getting a lot of requests, which you hopefully aren't. And this is one of those features that we hope you'll never actually have to use, because if your users are requesting to be deleted or anonymized, that means something went wrong upstream in your business process. But what we want to find out from you is what are the areas in your GDPR compliance journey where you're still feeling technical pain points. Right? There's a lot that we can do across the entire system to help with principles of data minimization or privacy by design, privacy by default. And especially as you guys have been on the forefront of implementing a lot of these policies, we'd love to hear what are some of the challenges that you faced so that we can really consider these things for upcoming versions of 7.2 and beyond. All right, that's it. Unfortunately, I think I am out of time, but I will be up here and I'd be happy to talk to you about what are some of the challenges you guys have encountered and things that we can do to really make what is otherwise a very painful process a little bit less painful. All right, thank you.